The purpose of this meeting is to discuss RCAP regarding water rates and to discuss and possibly recommend legislation. We have Mr. Nate Davis here from RCAP. If you want to go ahead, sir, go ahead.
Beth, excuse me just a moment. I had received a message from Marta. She went for a physician's appointment. They kept her, and she asked if someone could record this meeting.
Recording has started.
Thank you, whoever did that.
Got it.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Davis?
I apologize.
Yes, I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen here.
Recording is
the
on.
The Ohio program is actually administered here through Great Lakes Community Action in Fremont, Ohio. And the RCAP program, there's about, here in Ohio, there's about anywhere from 15 to 20 of us scattered around the state. And we provide financial and managerial assistance to mainly small water systems, that is communities that are of a population of 10,000 or less. For Ironton's purposes, that was why that the asset management plan was done on a fee-for-service basis, as they went over our minimum population requirements. But it doesn't really matter, because even the small communities, when we do asset management plans, we do them on a fee-for-service basis, because the Ohio EPA and the Ohio Water Development Authority and our other partners, they don't cover that in our grant program. So when we do those services, we have to recover our costs. I'm Nathan Davis. The mayor invited me to come. This actual presentation has already been given to the council, but Mayor Kremlin wanted me to come and give this to the board again. So I wanted to come and show this again. I am certified as an associate water asset manager. Received training on it. I've been with RCAP for about 12 years. Previous to that, I was the village administrator for Waverly, Ohio, in Pike County for 9 years. So I've been around water and sewer utilities for municipalities for quite some time now. And it's kind of we have two things here. We kind of have the overall asset management plan for the water system, which is now required by the Ohio EPA. And then along with that is the rate analysis, which kind of ties in what, the component to make the components and suggested components of that asset management plan work. That's what I'm going to talk about here today. I already went through who we are, so we'll kind of go through that. And what is an asset management plan, and why do we need a plan? Well, number one, it's required by the state of Ohio now for all water systems to have an asset management plan. There's many different definitions of what asset management is and what it entails. When it comes to water systems, really what it is proper utility management. It's kind of taking into account knowing what you have in your system, knowing the condition of it, of all the components, understanding the cost of the replacement of those, understanding all the preventative and predictive maintenance tasks that need to be involved in keeping those assets in a state of good repair for many years to come, and then having a plan financially to handle the different preventative and predictive maintenance tasks, the replacement of short-lived assets, and eventually major rehabilitation, replacement, and new and expansion projects. So we kind of have a ongoing planning cycle that should be occurring throughout the year when it comes to your water system. And then, of course, eventually what makes all that work together is having your rates working with your budgetary needs for not just now but into the future. So the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency passed a bill back in October of 2017. It was known as Ohio Senate Bill 2. It was passed in October, and it required all Ohio water systems to implement an asset management plan. I worked with the water utility staff, and including the mayor, including John, the financial director there, and over since sometime last summer all the way through around February, we worked together to put the plan together for Ironton. And a lot of this is rules and regulations that are required in the Ohio Administrative Code. Here's the chapter that those are called for. So a lot of your plan is components and aspects such as your contingency plan and other things that you already had. It's kind of bringing those together. So we kind of have a lot of these components that you already had that are in the asset management plan are your operation metrics and general data of the water system. That's all in there. There's a schematic of your water plant. There's the contingency plan, which is updated annually. There's your various rules and regulations of your water system that have been passed by ordinance by council. And then there's your best management practices, such as valve exercising and other things that we'll talk about a little bit more. One of the big first steps of an asset management plan is coming up with an inventory, which we did. We inventoried Ironton's system pretty thoroughly, and what you want to, and that is what it is basically this plan has been presented to the utility staff, to Ryan the operator, to Brett the superintendent, and then also the mayor and John. There is an Excel spreadsheet, and then that has various appendixes in it, and then there's also a Word document which is kind of a summarization of the plan. So anytime I refer to an appendix, such as this case, the inventory appendix K, it is in those spreadsheets, okay? So we did an inventory of the system, and we went through and we identified what we have, where it's at, what a general replacement cost for each of those assets is, and then we also kind of went through and we ranked each of those on a score of 1 to 6. 1 to 6 for, okay, what's the probability of failure for those components, each of these components, and then what's the consequence of failure for those components. And that way it kind of gave us a weighted score and kind of gave us what our priorities are in terms of identifying capital improvement projects and identifying, what needs the most attention. This is just kind of an example. I know you can't see all these numbers, but this is in your appendixes. This is just an example of your Appendix K, which is the inventory. It went through, for example, all of your wells. It identified all your tanks. It identified your meters and by size. It identified the different hydrants in terms of what year they were installed. And then there was also, we did a good inventory of the utility trucks and equipment. We came up with the replacement costs for those. We determined what the expected useful life remaining on those components was. And then we did, to the far right is the kind of the ranking that I talked about, where we gave it a 1 to 6 ranking on probability of failure and consequence of failure. and then kind of came up with a total score. Incidentally, the entire Ironton total asset replacement cost for the entire water system came out at an estimated $52 million. So that's kind of gives you an idea of the worth and the value of your water system there in Ironton. Once we did that, we kind of went through the plant and we decided, hey, okay, now within the system there are smaller, short-lived asset systems and parts that will require attention or require replacement. So we went through there and we identified those. This is kind of like, if you think about this, and I know you guys are kind of involved in this more, so I won't spend as much time as I did on the council, but it's kind of like thinking about your car. Within that car, there are several other, we could break that thing down into various parts. You've got your suspension, you've got your transmission, you've got your motor, you've got the body, you've got the frame, you've got all these different components that make up that entire car. That's kind of the same theory when it comes to the inventory of your water system and the whole asset management principle. So when we take that car, what we know is that here in America, a lot of our infrastructure was built right around the turn of the century, such as Ironton, and then there was another whole kind of wave that occurred in either the 1930s and then in the 1950s. So that's kind of the age that we have on a lot of our systems, and to this point we've kind of been in America kind of in this run to failure mode. So if we take a car, for example, we can buy that thing straight off the lot. We cannot change the oil, we cannot check the tire pressure, we cannot clean the battery connections, not flush the system on the coolant, not change the transmission fluid, etc., etc., etc. And that car will still probably last us at least 45,000 miles, okay? And that's kind of the run to failure mode that here in America we've kind of been in when it comes to our water and sewer systems. So we're trying to, it's kind of a change of culture. This has kind of been going on in Europe for several years because of their age of their infrastructure is highly older than ours. So it's a concept that's taken on there a lot sooner than it is here. So if you think about Ironton's water system, you know, like I said, it's a $53 million investment, but it's much more important than just your car, because it needs to be, you know, the car is just going to serve your family, whereas the water system, you know, it serves lots and lots and lots of families, and we want it to be there in a good state of repair for not just now, but for our grandchildren as well. So the next thing we did, once we went through the inventories, we determined, okay, we got with the staff, with the utility staff, and we determined now what preventative and predictive maintenance tasks are not being performed that are essential to the long-term health of the system due to lack of funds or resources in the water fund. And this is all identified in Appendix D and Appendix L of the plan. Okay? So one step at a time. There's preventative and predictive maintenance, things that we're not doing as well a job as that we need to maintain the water system. Those needs were identified as a GIS system needs to be integrated into the water system for better tracking and better mapping. Okay? There are some unmetered connections that need to be eliminated so that an annual AWWA standard water audit can occur and there can be a better handle on what the water loss situation is for Ironton's system. There needs to be a little bit more attention put to a valve exercising plan, or it at least needs to be greatly expanded to include some additional manpower. This is a component that the Ohio EPA is putting a lot of emphasis on. They recently have even brought up some communities on findings and orders for not having a good valve exercising plan to make sure that all the shutoff valves and isolation valves are in a constant state of good working order. There's additional annual maintenance that was identified that was needed to the PRV valves, to the booster pumps, and to the storage tanks. There was also a little bit of a training and certification process to a staff member for some the backflow prevention and valve inspection program. That's another item that the Ohio EPA does pay close attention to. So once we broke that down, this is a summary of that Appendix L for your preventative and predictive maintenance tasks that are needed, that are in the asset management plan. And this is just kind of a breakdown of those items that I just identified, and we kind of came up with what was required to do those, what the total additional cost was, and what years and how many years they were needed. So that came out to a total annual addition of $109,000, and then so what we did further was we broke that down on the very bottom of, obviously you're not going to implement that all in 1 year, so we broke that down into the first 5 years, slowly working in these identified new preventative and predictive maintenance measures. And so there's a breakdown, as in this slide here, in your plan that adds a little bit of those to the first 5 years of the rates. So now going back to the car example, within your system there's also short-lived assets, smaller components of the system that are going to need to be replaced before the system overall reaches its useful life. Most of those are in your plant, but there's also some others such as meters and valves and hydrants and other things of that nature. It's kind of like breaking your car down. You know that there's going to need to be a brake job done. You know that eventually that ignition system is going to be tuned up. You know eventually the serpentine belt after 30,000 miles is going to need to be replaced. And you also know after 40,000 miles the tires are probably going to need to be replaced. Same concept here when we're identifying the short-lived assets in your water system. So what are the short-lived assets in the water plant and the distribution system that will require periodic replacement? These are all outlined in Appendix L, and this is an example of it. We identified in the treatment plant there was filter media, valves, high lift pumps, chemical feed system, the building and structure itself. We broke out the well pumps. The booster station on Indian Hill has 2 pumps in it. There's the different pressure release valves throughout the system, the control valves, and then your meters and your hydrants. We broke down how many of those there are, what the total replacement cost is for each, and then in what years we are expected to have to replace those. And we came up with the total annual set-aside amount that we wanted to identify for preserving our short-lived assets. Same thing on your short-lived assets. We slowly integrated those costs in over a 5-year period. For example, of the total $141,000 of annual set-aside for replacement of short-lived assets, we simply integrated in $26,000 of that, so only a portion of that, and then worked up to $63,000 by the next year and $67,000 by the 3rd year, getting close to that total amount by the 4th year of $107,000. And that goes from all the short-lived assets identified in your plant, your distribution system, and even your vehicle and equipment inventory. So now we also know that no matter what, even if you replace short-lived assets, even with all the preventative and predictive maintenance, eventually there's going to be major rehabilitation that's going to need to be done. For example, in your car, you know that the motor eventually is going to have to be rebuilt if you keep it long enough on the road. The front end is going to have to be rebuilt. The transmission will probably at one point need an overhaul. This is what we want to refer to in our water system as our large capital improvement projects that will require debt to be able to perform, such as a major water plant rehabilitation project or the replacement of several thousand feet of water line. You're not going to be able to pay for that in cash through your budget. You're going to have to probably finance that. So what you need to have is an amount in your budget that is set aside for debt capacity. When it comes to this, Ironton has done, we kind of went through, this is kind of some of the existing capital improvement projects that have been identified for Ironton. And when it comes to this, Ironton has already done a good job. You have the Ironton Water Fund line item 39-17, which there's approximately $210,000 per year placed into that line, and that it seems to show more than adequate capacity for covering any debt payments that you would need for any of your major capital improvement projects. So Ironton pretty much kind of had this aspect already covered, and that looked very good. The last thing that we identify is, okay, does the water fund have a savings for a true emergency? And when, a true emergency, that main tank drainer that could occur in any given year and just blow your budget right out of the water. We always recommend that a system work towards saving a little bit every year, kind of have some set aside for that true emergency. What we recommend is that 1 to 2% of your annual revenue be set back for a true emergency, and then once it reaches a 12% total, you can cap that. And then that way, you've got a decent chunk of change set aside for when that major emergency does occur. So that's kind of what we went through, and we identified that. And so we identified all those different components that I talked about: preventative and predictive maintenance coming from the inventory, short-lived asset replacement, capital improvement projects that require debt, and then your emergency escrow. And that was kind of the plan. And so there's then a program. You have to kind of get a program started to implement that plan. And what ties all that together to become a program is your rates. And so that's where we have to kind of look at that and be willing to talk about that. Now, rates must include this asset management, what we call a complete cost recovery. And it's like I said, we're kind of talking about a change of culture. We're going from a run to failure to more of a asset management type culture. So we've got our best management practices that we identified for our preventative and predictive maintenance tasks. We've got our annual set-asides for replacement of short-lived assets. We've got our debt capacity for capital improvement, rehabilitation, and replacement projects. And then we've got our emergency escrow set aside. We also want to account every year a little bit for inflation impact. And what we used was a 3% annual impact on inflation for the cost of most of your materials, supplies, parts, labor, and electricity, because rarely do these costs go down. They usually go up a little bit every year, so we accounted for that in the rate study. Once again, this is all about trying to set up a system here where you're kind of getting away from a run to failure and more into an asset management philosophy when it comes to the maintenance of your water system. So how were the rates analyzed? Well, we reviewed the last 5 years of revenue and expenditure reports in your water fund, and we looked for trends. We went through line item by line item, determined if we had a situation where a line item was actually becoming cheaper every year, or if it was going up, or if it was fluctuating. And we kind of, work towards if we needed to come up with an average or if we needed to use the last year's amount. We reviewed your current and future debt obligations in terms of your planned capital improvement projects. We looked very hard at the 2021 Water Fund approved appropriations that the council already approved. We worked towards that and then kind of came up with what we determined to be a typical year for you based on the last 5 years. And then we projected a base forward 10 years accounting for an annual inflationary index of 3%. Then, as I explained earlier, we systematically added in the newly established asset set-aside amounts, and then we accounted also, we anticipate a possible loss of water purchase from HECLA in 2025, so we did account for that in the rates in terms of the projections. So, we look at our current water rates for Ironton. Now, bear in mind, this is just the water. This is not sewer. This is not trash or any of that. We're just looking at just water. Right now, your cost per each 1,000 gallons is $6.44 per month. There's also an administrative fee of $2.50 per month that's added. That works out to a monthly bill for a 4,500 gallon per month customer, which is what the Ohio EPA and other funders consider to be an average. That means the average customer in Ironton is paying around $28.26 per month for their water. If we take the current annual median household income, not the average, the median of Ironton, which is identified by American Community Survey at $35,000, that means a typical bill payer for their water bill portion only is paying about 0.97%, not quite 1% of their annual income towards their water bill. And we look at that because that's kind of how the funders, when it comes to low interest loans and grants and things of that nature, this is what they look at. They determine that 1.5 or more is what they would consider to be on the high end. So Ironton, in terms of that regard, is lower than what they would consider your rates to be very affordable. Now, this is not why we recommend a rate increase, but I just wanted to show you that because that's what they do look at. So a threshold or ideal percentage, and that's just in the perception of the EPA and the funders, is usually about 1.5% per utility. So, in our projections, taking all of this new information and new set-asides and inflation that we've all been talking about, we're recommending for starting on July 1 for an increase to $8.76 per thousand for the water, and then taking the administrative fee up from $2.50 to $2.58. That would mean that the affordability in an average bill for a 4,500 gallon customer would go from the current $28.26 to about $37.61, going to an affordability index of about 1.29. Now, after that, the increases are not as steep. They're a lot less, more gradual. For example, in January of 2022, there would be another slight increase from $8.76 to $9.20, and the administrative fee would go from $2.58 to $2.65. And then in 2023, you're talking about cents on the dollar from $9.20 to $9.47. And from the administrative fee from $2.65 to $2.73, and you can see so on and so on. After that, so for example, there's kind of a big increase, then a kind of a moderate increase, and then very incremental increases after that, starting in 2023. If we keep going further out in the projections, kind of the same thing, pretty incremental. And if you notice, I found it kind of ironic that it was by about 2029 with those increases that you started reaching that affordability index percentage that the EPA looks at. But once again, the rate increases are not based on that. They're based on making sure that you have adequate enough revenue to cover your basic O&M and to also make sure that you are doing all the preventative and predictive maintenance that you need to do, and also that you are replacing your short-lived assets, that you have debt capacity for your capital improvement projects, and that you also are setting aside a small amount for an emergency. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for questions. That kind of ends my presentation, and I'm going to kind of open it up for questions at this time.
Thank
Nathan, this is Councilman Mike Pierce.
Yes, sir.
Does your or what does your rates, do they take into account any personnel or additional personnel that may be needed?
They did, and what that was, and I'm going to go back here to my presentation. They did, and where it took that took account was in the preventative and predictive maintenance. In preventative and predictive maintenance, one area that, when talking with Brett and Ryan and the mayor, that was identified as inadequate was the valve exercising. And what it amounts to is that given it was identified that with Brett and his current staff, a vast majority of their time is being taken dealing with day-to-day activities, especially with there's a lot of, we know that there's areas that they're having to deal with a lot of main breaks. Bottom line is they've got the equipment that they need to have a nice valve exercise machine, but when they're not able to dedicate, they would like to work where there was actually a person who was pretty much responsible for just valve exercising on any given year. So starting in 2022, there was additional staff proposed valve exercising plan. So there was additional staff introduced in the preventative and predictive maintenance set aside starting in 2022 of $80,000. And that's for salary, benefits, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, and so that's just one person?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any other
have
questions?
anything else?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Nathan, this is Nate Klein, Iron City Council.
Yes.
A couple of questions. You said you referenced there were some unmetered connections in the city.
Yes.
Did you identify where those are?
Yes, they're in the slide. Let me find the slide here. I actually did name those. Just a second, and I'll find it. I know it's in the plan. I might not have them listed in the appendixes here. Let me make sure. I did, yes. City building, water plant, sewer plant, spray park, horse park, Little League and community service building. Those were the ones that were identified. Not a big cost there. We're only looking at about $8,000 or so to meter those connections. And the only reason that it's recommended that those be metered is because even though those are buildings are not receiving a bill and are not customers, but it will go a long way in being able to have a very accurate number on tracking your city's water loss.
Okay. You also referenced an annual AWWA water audit that should be completed.
Yes. That's what it is the American Water Works Association. They have on their EPA website, there's kind of a standard that they use, and I don't have there's a slide that shows kind of what's all involved in that, but it's a very incremental process of tracking who you're billing and then what water you're losing at the plant, whether or not all your meters are accurate, accounting for any water leaks that you have, and really coming up with an accurate, true measure of what percentage of your water you are losing. I identified $5,000 in there for that purpose in 1 year, because that would be the amount that someone like RCAP, and there are others such as the American Water Works Association, would charge to give the city some training and help them perform that first water audit so that they could continue that process on their own.
Okay. Would that take additional personnel on the city's part?
No. No, the only additional city personnel were identified were for hiring a person to conduct valve exercising exclusively.
And is there any estimated savings for water loss based on that water audit in your proposal?
There's no any estimated savings. No. What that would help you do is determine down the road. A lot of communities will identify themselves as having a 30 or even high as 40 or 50% water loss. But a lot of times, once you go through a complete AWWA standard water audit and take in everything that needs to be taken into account there, a lot of times it's determined that it's more than not something as meters or something like that is not calibrated or not correct. And usually a community's water loss is not near as bad as what they anticipated.
And how many, in your review, how many metered residents did you evaluate?
Let me see, I don't have the exact number. It was well over 4,000. It's in the plan. It's in one of the first appendixes. I don't have that in the slide presentation. You give me just a second, I can look that up.
Initially, I think there was more than what we had, but we had to go back and look at that because I think it was going based off of all the residential shut off, how people can turn on and turn off on the same residence, right. Different accounts.
Just a second, I can get that number. I'm pulling it up in another file. We have identified Ironton as having approximately 4,340 total metered customers. 4,340.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, I'm having some technical issues. So you took the 4,340 meters times 4,500 on average for each meter. Is that correct?
Well, now now in terms of your usage, we basically broke that down into looking at your actual usage. The 4,500 number is just what the Ohio EPA determines to be a typical residential usage customer. In terms of Ironton itself, most of your residential customers are probably a little less than that, probably somewhere between the 2,500 and 3,500 range, right in there. But for just simple comparison, affordability reasons, it's 4,500 is the number that the Ohio EPA uses when they look at that affordability index percentage.
So you went back and looked at actual
Yes.
total gallons sold
Correct.
in prior years.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Correct.
Nathan, this is Mike Pierce again. If we know the total amount, the gallons of water produced, and then we know how many gallons that we sold, wouldn't that come awfully close to telling us what our loss is?
It is a rough estimate, yes. It is a rough estimate. Now, there's other things that have to be taken into consideration, such as leaks. There's also calibration of your meters. There's water that's used in flushing. There's the water that's used at your unmetered locations. So, yes, it will give you a rough estimate, but in order to really analyze that water loss and come up with a very good, accurate, solid percentage, there's just some other things that have to be taken into consideration. But you're correct. That is what you should be monitoring at a minimum every year when looking at your system. And I know Ryan has done a good job of at least analyzing that to some degree in some of the charts and spreadsheets that he's already keeping.
You don't happen to have those numbers available to you?
I do not have them. I think right now we are identifying as the water loss for Ironton be at approximately 35% is what we're assuming at this point, according to the records that Ryan was keeping. And the EPA, of course, they're going to want to see that number at 20% or less. Personally, if you're at 20 to 25, you're doing really well. Looks like Ironton is right around 35%. So there could be a little issue there, but given the age and condition of most of your mainline pipe, actually it's not too bad.
Nathan, this is John. In addition to the non-metered buildings, there's also stuff that affects that if the fire department goes out
Yes.
and opens a hydrant and uses water that way in eliminating a fire, then that also would be kind of classified as lost water, right?
Unaccounted for water. They'll call it the term they use now is non-revenue water. We used to just call it water loss. Now it's referred to as non-revenue water is the new quote-unquote buzzword. But yes, John, you're correct. That would be something else that would need to be taken into account.
Does anyone know what it costs to produce 1,000 gallons of water?
Yep.
We have taken a good look at that. There is actually a chart in that in your asset management plan. It would be the last appendix, and it determined through me, the mayor, John, Brett, and Ryan worked through that pretty extensively on a couple of different meetings and analyzing the finances. And the number that we came up with right now is that it's $1.64 per 1,000 gallons.
Nate, I got 3 questions, and I want to get them in. I'll start with the easiest.
Okay.
This is Craig Harvey.
Hey, Craig.
So, first question, you proposed 1 to 2% savings for contingency, capped at 12% of annual revenue. Was that of all annual revenue or just the water fund?
Just the water fund.
Okay. My second question was, did you factor in a 3% annual increase in your numbers? Because we've been discussing on council implementing little by little either a cost of inflation based on consumer price index or a cost of living adjustment that wasn't quite at 3%. So did you factor that 3% into your numbers?
I did. I factored in a starting in this year and then each subsequent year afterwards, most expenses going up by a minimum of 3%.
Okay, so then my final question is, back to your slides. I have a problem with the numbers.
Okay.
And I don't know how I didn't catch it the first time.
Okay.
Back to your slides on the affordability index, the average.
Okay. Yes.
The average, yeah, the 4,500 gallons that we've been talking about.
Yes.
So based on our 644 and 250, that's roughly $9. If the average citizen in Ironton is at 4.5, well, 9 times 4 is 36, which is above the 28 that you've got as the average price that a water consumer pays in Ironton. And then we would round that up to 5,000 gallons. So they'd be closer to $44 rather than $28.
Greg, there's only one water admin fee. It's not one fee per thousand.
Okay. So that's
Correct.
So that's what takes it to 28.
Yeah, it would be 4,500 gallons at the $6.44 per thousand, and then $2.50 per month administrative fee charge.
That still doesn't really add up to 28 in my head, if even at 4,000.
Well, there's probably some slight variation on the fact of it, because it depends on how your software, like if they go to 4,000, if they go to 4,001 gallons, are they going to be charged a whole nother $6.44, or does it have to go all the way to 5,000 before that additional $6.44 is added in? So there could be a little variation there.
If we build it at 4.5, Craig, to answer you, that comes to $31.48.
Okay, so I'm
some months
slightly
are going
lower.
to be billed 4, and some months are going to be billed 5.
Does that increase our affordability?
If it did, I mean, we're talking, very minimal. But I mean, obviously it would, but I doubt that it would. I doubt that it would take you up over 1%.
Okay. Those were the 3 issues I saw.
Okay. And like I said, that's just kind of a, we always try to work towards the right rate for your system based on your maintenance, age, condition, personnel, and inflationary and debt needs. The affordability index percentage, we show it because obviously if we start getting into recommending rates to a utility that are 1.8, 2%, then that kind of raises a red flag of, hey, this is getting cost prohibitive, So it's something that we look at, and it's something the funders are going to look at in terms of, your eligibility for grant purposes, and a lot of times. But like I said, unless there's a red flag there and you're well up over the 1.5, it's not a reason, we don't look at someone's rates and say, well, they're only at 0.85. We got to raise them. Well, no, that's based on, how you're covering your standard daily O&M, what preventative and predictive maintenance tasks you're doing or not doing, and so on, that we talked about in the asset management plan. I just want to reiterate that that's what we work towards. And we do look at that percentage and make sure that it's not way out of line, but it's not like the major determining factor of what level we recommend the rates to be.
That $31.48 would put it at 1.8%.
Okay. All right, so you're a little over 1. 1.8. Okay, 1.08 as opposed to 0.97.
Nathan, this is Nate Klein again. Does RCAP provide any material that we could distribute or make available to our residents? Some of this information you're providing to us that would be able to inform them of the issues that we are facing and just something to kind of summarize that. I know that's something that you've done, but I think, one of the things that we have to take into consideration is all the residents and affordability on their end and really education piece.
Right. I can certainly, I know that there has to be some examples from some other communities of how they've handled this situation, and I would be more than happy to get with my coworkers and try to find some of those examples and share those with Ironton.
Thank you.
Nathan, this is Chris. Hey, just a quick question. Did RCAP take into consideration the recent agreement we made with ABM on the cost savings program we entered with them?
I'm going to defer that question to the mayor. I believe we did, but I did not want to misspeak there.
In what terms, Chris? Like
in general,
like their assets, their asset grades, or their paying?
No,
savings?
Like the savings plan. Yeah, the savings that you should be seeing within.
In the water department, we didn't do much more than the lights and the HVAC stuff because they were way too high on the cost of the things they wanted to do for the water department. There wasn't much. It was almost like a wash to do the improvements and pay for it up front with that bond. Now it'll be able to be paid for from, I might need a little bit more help from John. I don't have that information in front of me, but they separated the two, water from the rest of everything else, because water had a lot of different things on it. And same with wastewater. They didn't incorporate wastewater either, with the unknown to come with our system there.
Good deal. Thank you.
Anybody have anything else?
So Nathan, with the rates that you've proposed, that also incorporates what that life expectancy is of everything that we're going to be changing at those years. So those rates actually account for what we can expect to be paying, not only to keep us, up with the cost of inflation, but also with what we're expected to have break down, say 2022, 2023.
Right, and that's very important to understand. Is yes, I mean we've referring back to that term, complete cost recovery. We don't want the water utility to be in survival mode. We want it to be where we have the revenue we need to systematically conduct our day-to-day operations, and also on a schedule basis be able to replace some of the smaller short-lived assets within the system, and then also making sure that we're doing all the preventative and predictive maintenance measures that we need to be doing to make that asset last as long as possible.
And to clarify, that's, we're taking in the life expectancy, but that doesn't mean if water pump number 3 doesn't go down by its expected 2024 date, you also still go ahead and replace it because that's what you raised the rates for. That's what the rates said that we were supposed to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's taking into it. Right. No, it's based on, for example, a meter is, got an expected useful life of 10 to 15 years. There's certain, all those pumps. If we go back to the charts there,
if that meter lasts 17 years, go ahead and replace it on the expected date that we accounted for it, right?
That's what the rates are designed for. Yes.
That's where I think with Nate Klein's question about, with the residents and stuff, I think if we commit to these rates, the way we can, explain to them that it's the safety of it, to reassure them that, hey, these are the improvements that we are making over these years as well, that those rates are going to account for. Would you say that is a good way to put it?
Yes, it's kind of it's like, instead of waiting for the fire to occur before you go out and put out the fire, it's identifying, the conditions of when that fire is most likely to start occurring and replacing the component before that occurs. So that is definitely a strategy and a concept that this is taking into an account.
So it's not just us raising the rates to keep the fund solvent. It's us raising the rates to make the improvements we know will be made to improve our water flow.
It's raising the rates to make sure you can cover your daily operation and maintenance, all those fixed costs that you already have. It's raising the rates also to ensure that there's preventive and predictive maintenance that we're not doing that we need to do in order to make our system last as long as it should. And then there's also other smaller, low-cost components in the system that are going to wear out that we want to make sure we stay on top of and replace before they fail. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we have funding available to when a true emergency occurs, like what happened in Gallipolis not too long ago, or Logan with their valves. That the city has some money set aside to handle that from their water fund, and they're not blowing the general fund out of the water in 1 year, trying to handle that situation.
Yeah, the questions I was asking was to kind of get more clarification out of it for if anybody still had questions about how I think the selling point on it is that we are making the improvements that we need to. We're not just raising the rates to have a cash cow set aside, rainy day fund, but we do have a small amount. You said 2% on the rainy day fund to cover those emergencies.
Right.
You're not doing anything unnecessary.
Right.
Well, Mayor,
Anybody else?
Mayor, to touch upon what you said, I live down in the North End, and this was built in the 50s and 60s. So our water lines are, 70 years old, and the life expectancy of that, I truly don't know if they're iron, if they're clay, if they're galvanized. But we have to plan for the future. The rest of the city is even older.
Yeah, that's correct. And those are in the best shape that we have. So the ones on that end, and they're 70 years old.
Anybody else?
I appreciate you coming on, Nate. I don't know if you want to share with them any of the ongoing conversations on bulk rates. I know it's a little tough to get you on here. I don't want to talk about the numbers that we were working with, but the negotiations that we have.
I don't obviously I don't want to step out of bounds, but I will say that, this is something that when it comes to trying to work towards selling water to Coal Grove, I think it's important to understand that in the eyes of the Ohio EPA, I think they view it as practical and the most affordable solution for Coal Grove. Coal Grove is in a situation where they are looking at having to completely rehab or build a new plant at a cost of approximately, $4 to $5 million. And I think when certain preliminary engineering reports were performed and shown to the EPA, I think the EPA came to the realization that it would made more financial sense for Coal Grove to purchase water from Ironton, who has capacity and who is moving forward, with maintaining their system. I think the EPA views Ironton in a good light, and I think they view it as a practical means of, instead of providing additional grant funds or whatnot to Coal Grove, I think they view this as the more practical solution. So that being said, obviously, Ironton does not want to get themselves in a situation where they are burdening themselves or causing themselves any financial problems. Obviously, if you're selling water, if you're in the bulk water business, there does need to be some profit there, and obviously that's all going to come down to Ironton and you guys' thoughts and your final decisions on that. But in terms of practicality, I think Ohio EPA is favorable for that and would like to see that happen.
Very good. I just wanted to kind of, a lot of you haven't talked to about it, but we have had a couple meetings with Coal Grove and they've went really well. And I just wanted to put it on your radar that we may need to, once we've reached an agreement, if that comes to it, that we'll probably have to look at our bulk rate of which we sell at.
Anybody else?
I'll motion to adjourn PUC.
Second.
Thank you, Nate.
Get a second.
Not a problem.
Aye. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nate.